Reading to dogs. The hardest part was getting the owners to leave. They didn't trust their dogs to behave in the bookstore. Each dog had a bowl of kibble, and its owners knelt to kiss them, a few capsized bowls with their knees. The dogs ate the kibble and wagged their tails. In the preceding half hour, they'd been allowed to sniff all the books, and their excitement had made them tired. The only dog that lifted his leg was a mournful Irish wolfhound, now placed nearest the door. One of the bookstore assistants stood by, ready to take him out at the slightest sign of leg lifting. The reader, a woman in her mid-30s, was in back of the store, impatient for owners to leave. It has always been her passion to read to dogs, dogs of all shapes and sizes, dogs assembled together. A few people to whom she'd expressed this passion had misunderstood and suggested reading about dogs at special events in pet stores. But she didn't want to read to owners. She wanted to read to dogs, and this wouldn't just be about dogs. This wouldn't just be about dogs, any more than reading to a group of women would be just about women. The story she planned to read, though, did involve one dog, and it happened to be an Irish wolfhound. Thankfully, when the real Irish wolfhound lifted his legs, someone with foresight placed a bowl between him and the book. If the dog had peed on the book, she would have had to pick a different breed and make the story more exciting, because the cameraman from the TV station had gotten a clear shot of the dog's legs on the book, and the event might have eclipsed her quiet reading. In a scant 10 minutes, she would have had to change the breed of the dog, plunge a knife into the beginning of the story for a good murder, and tear off clothes in the middle for hot sex. Now she could read without changing a word. The story was called Boudica the Enchanted Princess. She'd chosen something short so she could read slowly and pay attention to the dogs. She wanted to see if they listened, and she wanted to be sure it was the story they were interested in as a story, having nothing to do with dogs. "Please don't use the word dog in your introduction," she said to the bookstore owner. "Some of them know that word, and it might make them overexcited." He looked startled but agreed. His introduction was brief and didn't really matter because it had nothing to do with who she was at the moment. It didn't mention the red shoes pinching her feet or the Citizens for Humanity jeans pinching her ass, nor did it talk about her utter joy in being able to read to dogs. After an introduction in which the word dog wasn't used, she stepped to the podium and made eye contact with each dog. They looked at her with eyes that were moist, a little wolfish, and wagged their tails. They waited. And so she began to read about Boudica, a beautiful princess who'd been made into a furry calico cat by an evil stepmother. Boudica became small, had whiskers, and was adorned with orange, black, and white fur. She had a sad, enchanted face, marked by an M between her eyes. After becoming a cat, Boudica was exiled from her kingdom and adopted by a couple who always fought. One day, when they were arguing, the man flopped on the bed and saw Boudica in her gorgeous fur. Their eyes locked, and he saw she was a princess. This transformed Boudica back into being human. The dogs were attentive and quiet. They put their noses between their paws when Boudica was exiled and wagged their tails when she turned back into a person. "Now it gets a little complicated," she said to the dogs apologetically. The man fell in love with Boudica and left his wife and proposed, but Boudica wasn't sure she wanted to stay with the man. She joined a gym with co-ed exercise rooms, fell in love with women and men, and eventually decided to go back to the man who had broken the spell. But when she came back to his house, he was angry, and she had to sit outside until he got over it and proposed again. The dogs wagged their tails and looked up. She went on. In homage to her life as a cat, Boudica wore an enormous catsuit to her wedding. But when she walked down the aisle, the cat costume crumpled, and a small calico cat jumped out. The flower girls cried and ran to their mothers. The minister, a therapist with a certificate to divinity, tried to catch the cat. And then, without warning, the groom turned into an Irish wolfhound. For a moment it was a horror show while the respected shadow totems barked and hissed and ran around the church until suddenly, miraculously, they became people again. At the altar, the therapist minister said, "What are your original faces to yourselves and to each other? This is a question you will ask for the rest of your lives." They kissed and had a wonderful reception with an enormous buttercream cake. When the totem animal conflict occurred, the dogs put their noses between their tails and whimpered. When the wedding cake appeared, they wagged their tails. Yet they still looked expectant, because for dogs, the prospect of endless excitement is infinite. So she looked at them quietly and said, "That's the end." The dogs understood. They raised their noses and howled. Their heads went back so far their snouts touched the books behind them, and book after book tumbled to the floor. The bookstore owner, still cautious, allowed her to shake their paws. Each dog licked her hands, so by the time the TV man interviewed her, she had sticky fingers. He thrust a microphone under her chin and wanted to know what it was like reading to dogs. She talked about their wagging tails, their whimpering, their howling, and the way they watched her, all signs they followed the story. Also, not mentioning the most terrible incident with the wolfhound, she said they hadn't run around as everyone feared, but were silent and attentive. Why was that, the interview wanted to know. She said it was because the dogs knew she was reading to them, not at them. He pondered this for a moment, and then asked how her own dogs had enjoyed the reading. She had to tell him she didn't have any dogs. "Not one?" "No," she said, "not one." "Well then," said the TV man, "you must have had a dog when you were a child, a dog who listened to your first stories. Maybe this was a way of reliving some wonderful times in your childhood." Again she had to tell him she'd never had a dog. The man stared at her, then at his notes, which she could read because she was taller. She saw numerous questions about her dogs she'd never owned. Questions about their names, their eating habits, their breed, and if they slept on her bed and had favorite parks. It was clear the man couldn't think of anything else to ask, so he thanked her and went to talk to the bookstore owner. Later, with her cats, she watched the news so she could see the reading. There she was, microphone jabbing her chin, but only for a moment. "It was amazing," said the interview. "The dog sat still and listened. He didn't mention their howling or wagging tails or waiting to be told the end. Nor did he say she didn't have any dogs, and he said she hadn't talked about her own dogs out of respect for their privacy." Then the bookstore owner appeared and said reading to animals was a daring experiment, a high-concept event, one that would catch on everywhere. "A boon," he said, "a boon to all of us." She poured herself a huge glass of scotch and hugged her cats. She'd agreed to the video only because it was the way the bookstore owner would let her read to dogs, and now the event was a travesty. Yet, as the camera panned around the store, she saw all the dogs, a vast carpet of differently colored furs. She saw their ears, their noses, their wagging tails, and their sense of outrageous, exuberant radiance. It spilled into her own womb, filling the air with boundless joy, endless delight and adventure. Dogs, 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 and more dogs.